If any of the things that I suggest disagree with anything that your instructor tells you to do, go with what your instructor says. Always. Absolutely. I give two pieces of advice to students that, when you put them next to one another, might lead to tension. The first is that brevity is key. I've mentioned this before, but it really does bear repeating. The more words you use, the more you give yourself the chance to mess those words up. It's just math. The other is to develop chunky body paragraphs. Make the body paragraphs count. Really get into the content in the content paragraphs. A good, well thought out body paragraph is usually at least half a page, especially if you're in any modern, regular academic format, where you're probably double spacing your lines with a 1-inch margin all the way around and typing in 12-point font. That's a lot of white space on the page. Really, especially in higher level composition courses, or if you're an English major, just everything, you should be shooting for an average of 2/3 of a page for a healthy, important body paragraph. Note here that average means average. Even according to these tips, not every body paragraph you ever write needs to be that long. But if you have 5 3-line paragraphs in your essay, you probably need to work on your content. For some students, though, these two priorities can immediately come into conflict.
If I can't get wordy, how am I supposed to write lengthy paragraphs about this subject that I don't really know, /don't care about, /was assigned?
You might not like it, but the solution is going to require you to do some research. Fortunately, I've already made a video for help with that, which you can link to here. So for the purposes of this video, we'll assume that the assignment is either a research paper or allows for research. If it's a narrative, that's a different sort of thing. Write small, show, don't tell. As a sample, let's say I'm writing a paper about the effectiveness of college composition. My thesis might be, college composition provides students with the analytical and organizational skills they will need to succeed in the modern high-tech workplace. This is a pretty specific thesis, so I know that in my paper I'll be talking about 1. How college composition teaches valuable analytical skills. 2. How college composition teaches valuable organizational skills. And 3. How those skills are particularly important in the modern high-tech workplace. Let's deal with point number 1, which is really body paragraph number 1. How college composition teaches valuable analytical skills. So I found a source. Stewart describes an assignment in which she has her students research the Conestoga Massacre to understand its causes. She says, quote, "In analyzing the Conestoga Massacre, students, most of whom assume that knowledge is simple, absolute, and certain, find the complexity of distinguishing personal beliefs and moral issues from legal matters consternating. Yet, research in educational psychology suggests that struggle is integral to higher level learning." So the quote is saying that the assignment shows how students got past a narrow black and white view that is integral to higher level learning. This could be great for an essay, but how do I get that big chunky body paragraph out of it? So first, here are some things I'm not going to do. I'm not going to quote it and paraphrase it. Instead, I'm going to pick one. Why you might do one or the other depends on a lot of things, including the assignment requirements and your own writing style. I'm also not going to spend time summarizing the Conestoga Massacre. It's historically important, but it's not what my paper is about. I might even eliminate it from the quote or paraphrase by saying something like, "In teaching critical thinking in first-year composition, sometimes more is more, Ruth Stewart describes an analytical writing assignment that." So I have my quote, and I know it's valuable, but how do I use it? Well, there are a few ways. I could ask questions and maybe start to point at answers. But why do most students assume that knowledge is simple, absolute, and certain? Or why do students have trouble facing the knowledge that truth can be complex? Then, in the paragraph, I might start talking about any number of reasons, from how we raise and educate children to how the brain physically matures. I might also make connections with what's been said or what will be said. If this isn't the first body paragraph, how does what's going on in this paragraph connect to or compare with what you've quoted or paraphrased or just said yourself already? If things agree, show why. If things disagree, explain why and talk about how that could be good or bad. If this is your first body paragraph, how might it point at what's to come? Can you ask questions that could help your reader along your path? Am I doing that right now? I could also make connections to the thesis. It's easy to look like you're drifting away from the thesis as you're developing your content. So if you need to explicitly tie things back to that thesis, that can actually be a really good way to continue building relevant content. But make sure not to significantly rehash anything. If you've defined or explained anything, you don't need to do it again. Just make sure that there's a clear line from your thesis to wherever this specific body paragraph has come to. Now, if you get really good at building content this way, by setting your various quotes and paraphrases against one another and describing how they interact or can interact, you might find yourself not needing to rely so heavily on quotes and paraphrases in the future. For instance, what if I have a quote or a paraphrase that I'm able to work well with in my first body paragraph, and another I'm able to work well with in my second body paragraph? Now, what if I can take some of those points that I developed in response to those two quotes or paraphrases, my own responses that I came up with, and set them against one another in another body paragraph or two? Well, that makes for a 3 to 4 body paragraph essay filled with meaningful ideas that interact with each other and go neat places, all from 2 pieces of outside information. I would call that success. So another way is what I'll call the Turnabout Method, which I never had a name for until making this video just now. So everything I've said is nice when you've got a thesis that your sources agree with, or when you have a thesis that you can find sources to agree with. But what if your thesis is
different? What if you can't find anything that supports it? What if you can't find anything that even comes at the topic from the same way you're coming at it?
Unless it's written into the assignment, who's to say your sources all have to agree with you? So let's say that I'm still writing an essay about college composition, but now my thesis is different. Originally I said, college composition provides students with the analytical and organizational skills they will need to succeed in the modern high-tech workplace. My new thesis, on the other hand, says college composition does not provide students with the analytical and organizational skills they will need to succeed in the modern high-tech workplace. It's easy to change the thesis. But this, of course, means that I'm going to need to generate content in the opposite direction. That means different sources, and I would certainly want to do a whole new round of research if this were my position. But let's say that I came across that Stewart article anyway. And let's say that that particular quote that we looked at before caught my eye anyway. She says, again, in analyzing the Conestoga massacre, students, most of whom assume that knowledge is simple, absolute, and certain, find the complexity of distinguishing personal beliefs and moral issues from legal matters consternating. Yet, research in educational psychology suggests that struggle is integral to higher-level learning. Now, this clearly does not agree with my new thesis. So that means that there's no place for it in my new paper, right? Well, sometimes we prove we're right by proving how the other guy is wrong. There are formal models for this, rebuttals or refutations found in the Toulmin model and others. But that gets more technical and structured, and we're really just interested here in how you can generally work in a piece of material that disagrees with you. And the way I could do that here is by asking questions and pointing out weaknesses. But I'll have to get critical and that's not always nice. For instance, from the perspective of my new thesis, I might choose to bring up the Conestoga Massacre specifically to ask if the event is too old to be effectively relevant to today's college learners. If Stewart's lesson were effective, why not use current examples of racial injustice? Or, how can we question her belief that most students assume that knowledge is simple, absolute, and certain? Why might she think students think that way? And more to the point of the thesis, why might such an assumption make such a composition curriculum less effective? In my essay, I might include just one source that disagrees with me, or I could include more and show how, essentially, everybody but me is off the mark. That said, if you do find that all or most of your sources are disagreeing with your thesis, and you don't want to go all Butch and Sundance, maybe consider revising your thesis. Again, it's way easier to change one sentence than a bunch of body paragraphs. So, that's all for now. Leave your comments below and let me know if any of this helped. I'll see you next time.
Butterfly in the sky.